The best part about Awaken Realms reprinting the Castles of Burgundy is that they may finally bring us an amazingly produced, incredible version of this classic Feld design. On the other hand, they also have the potential of screwing this up for the third time. Hi, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and the Castles of Burgundy is my second favorite game of all time, as of this past year. It's my wife's favorite game of all time. It is one of the oldest standing games in our collection, alongside Seven Wonders having been from the first games we ever purchased and having still being here. I mean, 10 years later. It's a game I love. It's my favorite Feld game, which I guess if it's my second favorite game of all time, unless the first game is also a Feld game, that makes sense. It's my favorite game for Stefan Feld. It's an incredible masterpiece, and it has always looked blah. I know some people think it looks incredible in one version or another, but to me it's always looked blah. When we first got this game, my wife and I didn't play it for several months because we were not pulled in by the presentation, we were not pulled in by the artwork. That was back when we had the original edition of the game, not this new 20th, 10th anniversary, I think 20th anniversary of something, it's not, whatever. And then they reprinted it with this version over here. And people were excited. People were like, finally we have an opportunity. Because again, some people love the original design. Kudos to them. It did grow on me over the years. But then others, many others were like, this game does not look good. It is one of the best looking was one of the best games ever, but not a great looking game. And then they announced a reprint, and people were excited. And then they showed pictures of the reprint, and people threw up a little bit in their mouths. I'm probably exaggerating a bit. It's also probably fairly mean if you are the artist of the new version. I apologize to whoever did this, but the graphical design of the new version was not better than the graphical design of the old version. It did not compel me anymore. It was bad in an entirely different way. Not a worse way. I still have this version compared to the original version, but it was bad in a different way. I kept this version compared to the old version. I arguably prefer the old version. It had more time to grow on me, to have those light beiges sink into my imagination in some way, shape, or form. And I arguably prefer the original version, but the new version had all the expansions mixed into the box. I was wondering how it would be future compatible with different things, and there were enough small quality of life things, despite the graphical design, that I chose to stick with this version of the game. But again, they're both bad. It is an incredible game, one of my favorites, but it does not look pretty. The components are okay at best. The art is bad at best, and it feels like such a mistreatment, specifically because of the fact that it's such an incredible game. And now Awaken Realms is reprinting it for the third time. Awaken Realms, over on GameFAQ, you can check it out, I'll have a link down below. They are bringing us a deluxe version of Castles of Burgundy. What does that mean? What does that include? Well, we know a little bit. We know, first of all, I think the most important thing we know is that they are open, and not just open, they are seeking feedback. They want our opinions, which is for better and for worse, because the good part about asking our opinions, it means you don't end up with something else like this. You don't end up with another game where it goes on the forums and people are like, how did anyone think that was a good idea? Now you could point to at least 37% of people that thought it was a good idea, which is why it's a problem asking for opinions, because the problem with asking for opinions, especially when you give like a poll of, here are 3 art styles, now everyone vote on them, is inherently you could have someone winning with 34% of the vote. 34% of the vote can decide how all our copies of Castles of Burgundy look from here on in, even if the other 66% think it looks abysmal. I don't think they look abysmal, but I'm not confident of the art just yet, although it's harder to say because they're showing us styles, they're not showing us tiles. Those rhyme, it wasn't meant to, but it's an interesting process trying to loop everyone into the conversation. Inherently, it's messy because things that can be decided within a group of people just suddenly go out to tons and tons of people, making it harder, possibly better. Again, crowdfunding has its perks, and seeking opinions and seeing giant missteps can be helpful. Even now, as they show us 3 different art styles, there are numerous people saying, hey, by the way, I prefer this art style, but even within that art style, it's not consistent, which is messing me up. And it's great for Awaken Realms to have that feedback now. They may or may not listen to it, but at least they have the opportunity to hear from the disgruntled people, hear from the people who think that something could be improved upon, to hear all that before we actually go to production. Before this game is actually made in any way, shape, or form. Hence, by the way, this video. This is not 33% or 34% of the voice. This is a single voice, a single opinion, but it's just the conversation of what I want out of a Castles of Burgundy reprint. The things I'm looking for. The first of which is going to be the least helpful, which is better art better art with a question mark at the end of it, because I can't show you the art I want. I can only tell you that the last version wasn't it, this version isn't it, and the versions that are currently being shown on the GameFound page, while they all have aspects of charm to them, it's also hard to extrapolate from the presentation to what it's going to look like, because they're just showing us styles and not the physical tiles that will go onto your board, which makes it hard to see. But the first thing I want is better art. Again, it's not very helpful. It doesn't really drive the conversation forward in any way, shape, or form. And this, by the way, in case you didn't figure it out, is not a review at all. This is a conversation about Castle Burgundy, the fact that it's my favorite game, and what I want to see, don't want to see, and I'm kind of okay with either way, and just seeing all the stuff, seeing all the things here. I think the second thing I want, slightly more helpful, and we're going to go through a bunch of things in no particular order, just talking about various things, is I do not want the little dot on the tiles. There's a little dot on tiles. Some versions have it, some don't have it. It's the little black dot that indicates whether a tile is from the separate section of black tiles that go into the middle market over there. And it's fine, it helps you distinguish it, but I'd rather see artwork that illustrates that same point, but differently. You could have some sort of adjustment to the art that shows you it's from the center market. And I think it's important because some of the versions that got rid of it, as many others have pointed out, you're left trying to figure out and flip over every single tile in order to see where things are. So the downside is you have a harder setup, tear down, all that. The upside is, or the downside in the other direction, is you have a black dot on all your tiles. I'd love to see the blackness, the darkness, incorporated into the tiles in a visual representation that carries over from one to the next. So you can see the similar artwork of a boat, of a ship, combined with a ship that has a black dot in it, but instead of a black dot, you have tracings of black around the artwork that clearly show it as being different, while clearly show it as being the same. It is potentially a lot of work, it is potentially messy, it's going to make 73% of you unhappy, but I'd love to see that. If they can pull it off, I think it would be beautiful. I think it would have the best of both worlds, merging the visual representation of the styles into the game instead of having a black dot on half your tiles, while also making setup, tear down, clean up, all that particularly easy. And speaking of the tiles in general, something that has been very commonly requested, and it should be, is some form of dual layered board. Now, the opinions are mixed in this for a variety of reasons, and there are a whole bunch of different opinions out there. You can check out the GameFound page, where there's a whole thread full of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of comments going through a bunch of opinions. But the problem with the boards as they currently are is you have a whole bunch of boards and they are all incredibly thin. That incredible thinness results in these boards where you put down your tiles, they can shift, they can adjust, and it doesn't feel premium. And part of the reason we have this box version to begin with is that it's a premium edition. I've seen the calls for, hey, make it affordable, make it this, make it that, but this is a deluxe version of the game. I'm fine with them being an affordable version, to be very clear. If Awaken Realms can pull off giving you just a plain updated version of the game, and then a premium version on top of it, and keeping the price point of the regular version $50, whatever it is, great, and kudos to them. I don't imagine that will happen. I imagine we will have separate levels of what you can get, but I imagine the base price point on the low end is probably $80. On the low end, like $79. And that's, I could be wrong. I have no idea what the actual pricing will be. I just don't imagine you're looking at a comparable price to what you can get this game at if you're currently willing to get the current versions now. But going back to the dual layered boards, these tiles over here, the downside of having a full dual layered board, and for context, I don't necessarily mean every single ridge in between. The problem with having every single ridge in between, having every single ridge so that every tile is locked in place, is it can hurt the spacing of the tiles touching, additionally having the tiles hard to pull out. Now you can solve for the second problem by having the thickness of the tiles being higher than the thickness of the spacing. So you have a low ridge of spacing, you have a thicker tile, and you can just pick up the tile easily enough. That might work, it might not work, it depends on how well you can incorporate that spacing into a visual design, connecting them all beautifully or messily, and it could go either direction. But I'm fine with it if it does, if they are able to do that, if they're able to maintain the cohesive aspect of the game while having the spacing between every single tile, that'd be great, it would lock everything in place. On the other hand, if you want kind of a comparison point, you can go with the tile, a board similar to what we have in Calico, where you have double layers, but you have double layers around the edges so that everything is sort of in place, still room to move, still room to adjust, but you still have a general double layered aspect around. Now, part of the problem with that is I do like the fact that there are a ton of boards in Castle Burgundy. We have all these different board options, and if you double layer every single thing, you do have a potential problem on your hands because that is a lot of boards, which means it's a lot of space, which might be good and might be fine. If you have all those locations for Marvel United, then you already are used to carrying around a ton of cardboard. But it also might be something you don't like. And so to that end, something you could potentially do, I'm not recommending it necessarily, I'm recommending it as an option, is you have these situations like Sagrada over here, where you have a single casing, and then you slot in, well, that's actually upside down, but you got the drift over there, you slot in these cards over here that go into the double layered area, so you get to have the variety of the boards while maintaining the singleness of having a few of these little sheaths over here. So those are options on the table, not necessarily what I'm specifically recommending one way or the other, but I would want some form of double layered something that feels a bit more premium than these flimsy boards that the tiles shift, adjust, and move around. So I'd love to see that. Speaking of tile thickness, in terms of the way they fit into those boards, I would want to see increased thickness in the tiles. If this is a premium version, and I still don't know what their plans are as far as miniatures or not miniatures, we'll get to all of that shortly, but assuming for the sake of this conversation that we're going with tiles, I'd want slightly bigger tiles and slightly thicker tiles. Slightly is the key word over here. Slightly bigger in terms of the general sizing, because too big, and suddenly this sheet over here is also too big. But a little bigger I think we can get away with. I think that, I don't know, a 15-20% adjustment in size can make this not overwhelmingly large while still giving you a significantly more premium experience in terms of the feeling of your game. Not, a Castle of Madigan Ludwig giant big box version, but something nicer and more premium. But at the same time, I'd like to see something thicker. And it doesn't have to be cardboard. Arguably, it shouldn't be cardboard. Are we looking at wood pieces, bakelite, some form of something? I mean, there's a lot of options out there for giving you a more premium material, something that is thicker than this, fits nicely into your board, still maintains the visual cohesiveness of everything you're going for. I think there are options, but I would want to see those tiles improved. That's going to be a big part of making this game feel premium to begin with. A huge thing I want, an absolutely huge thing, is deluxe bags to pull your tiles from. You see, all the tiles in Castle of Burgundy are coming from various bags, and some of them it doesn't really matter where you're pulling from. You're pulling those ships, they're all the same. They can go into the various zones. But you're pulling the animals, the buildings, the science tiles. Those all have differences to them, and so to that end, you want to have a degree of randomness around them. And you have a few options there. You can do what I currently do, which is I have my little insert, I take the tiles out, I shuffle them all down, I take them out as I go, I put them back in, and it works, it does the job. But I'd love to see premium bags to store your tiles in. You can just reach into the bag, pull it out, put it on the table. I think that would be the ideal way to go. It even potentially, if you want to go down this road, it even allows you to have the tiles be double-sided, which adds another degree of just simply not even having to worry about which side or rotation it is. Just grab a tile from the bag, put it out. You have your black tiles, you have your buildings, you have your science tiles. Ideally, for coherence, for cohesiveness, you have all the bags, even the ones that don't need it, going through that. It allows you to have a degree of accessibility of just bagging up everything, although the bags, if you do go that route, the bags should obviously be good quality, and more importantly, the bags have to be, you have to be able to reach your hand into the bag. It cannot be a thing where you're kind of like squeezing your hand into a bag to try to pull out a tile. But I'd love to see premium felt bags, ideally with the tiles double-sided. I say ideally because I recognize that is a problem, because right now, you can easily offer premium felt bags as an add-on for those like me who want it without getting in the way of those who don't want that as an option. But if you do that, if you do it as an option, then you can't have the tiles be double-sided because they'll only work for those who are going with a bagged approach. So that I recognize the challenges there, but that would be my personal ideal of what I want. I want more obvious animal pictures. I probably should have prepped some examples over here, but at a glance, many of the animals, in terms of the game, like let's say, even these, when you're looking at the animals in the game, when you're looking at the animals in Castle Burgundy, as you load up your fields with different types, it's not always immediately obvious what those animals are. Now, some of this might be solved by having the larger tiles. Some of it might. But in some way, shape, or form, the animals need to be more obvious. They need to stand out more quickly at a glance so that you don't accidentally grab the wrong type, or more worrisome, plan around the wrong type. It has happened to me in more than one game of Castle Burgundy where someone's looking around the table and they're like, and now I'll grab the cows, and I'm like, those are horses. And they're like, oh. And they just spent the past 3 turns planning as if they're cows, planning a strategy around adding it to their field, and they can't get what they want. Their turn is ruined. There's no way to take it back properly. The best thing we can do is just pretend that they're cows to let him go with what he was planning on. Although if they're cows, I probably would have taken them, so it messes up the entire system. It has happened to me multiple times. I'm sure it'll happen again. I'd like to in some way have the animals be clearer, more obvious, although the challenge, of course, is still making them cohesively fit into the theme of the game. If your animal is as large as your building, kind of takes away from the immersion to a degree, although to be fair, that already is a problem, meaning it's more of a problem, I guess, but these cows over here, let's try to show you these over here, these cows definitely don't fit into those buildings in terms of a sizing comparison. Those cows are as big as the towers. Are they even cows? Nope, they're horses. You see, that's what I'm talking about. Those horses or donkeys or whatever they are, they're as big as the building, so we already have that challenge, although it could be worse. It could get to be more problematic, but I'd like to see that in some way addressed. I want a player aid for all the science tiles. See, right now, in the newest version of Castle Burgundy, we have this very nice handy-dandy player aid that shows us all the core tiles in the game, plus some expansion tiles as well, shows us all the buildings, shows us the core idea of how everything works, and I think that's great. I want a player aid. I don't care if it's on the back of this, I don't care if it's for each player to have one, I don't care if it's a single one for the table to have, but science tiles are a huge part of Castle Burgundy, having all these science tiles that come out, and yes, you absolutely could, and I do, go ahead, and every single time a new one comes out, most of them I recognize by now, but every once in a while there's that one that comes out that I don't remember, and then I flip through the book, and I find it over here, and I'm like, okay, great, we got it over here, and that one, oh, that one lets you do that. That's unnecessary. I should not be flipping through the rulebook every single time to figure out what the newest science tile does. There are a few options to this. You can, if you are doing it the bagged approach, you can have it printed on the back of the tile. Many of you won't like that. I get it. Even I'm torn on it. I think it's potentially the most player-friendly, but it's kind of annoying, especially if you're not going with the bagged approach, in which case it's intensely annoying. But have a player aid. Have some sort of degree of something where, again, either the individual player or something for the table. I should not have to be flipping through the rulebook to find where the newest science powers are. And while we're on the subject of science powers, I want more science powers. I also want more board layouts, more science powers, more things that don't necessarily drastically affect what Castle of Burgundy is as a game, because I like it as a game. I'm not looking for it to be drastically changed, but more variety, more boards, more science tiles. Maybe they'll throw in an expansion, as long as I could completely leave the expansion if it's not for me. That works for me. But more science tiles, more of the same stuff. More board layouts, more variety to the general experience that we're having. I want deluxeified resources. Now, this should be a no-brainer to some extent. I mean, we're going to have them to a degree. The question is what and how. And I don't mean deluxeified crates, not the resources that you're putting out over here. We'll get to that. I do have mixed thoughts on that. But I've already improved my Castle Burgundy game in a variety of ways. I upgraded my initial silverlings to these over here, to these options I got in Etsy. I upgraded my various workers to these worker tiles that I got in Etsy. These are nice premium upgrades that I have for my Castle Burgundy game. Although I've already upgraded my silverlings to something even better, because I've since been using these metal ones from Top Shelf Gamer over here, these ones over here, these tiles over here that feel very nice and solid and give you a very solid silverling feel. We have these workers over here showing you the plus or minus 1 on them, giving you a nice little 3D tile. It's nice, it's not amazing. These are really where the fun is at. These tiles over here, these metal, and they have heft to them. I definitely want some form of deluxeified resources. I don't know if I prefer coins. I think I prefer this, honestly. I think if you're pulling coins from a mine, silverlings are coming from a mine, you have mines on the board, you get these, I think I'd prefer to use these. Even if they offer, deluxe metal coins, unless they improve upon what Top Shelf Gamer is offering over here, I may well prefer these pieces over here to be something that visually represents something solid that I'm pulling out from the mine. As far as the workers are a harder conversation. What do we want for the workers? Do we want miniatures? I feel like that might be over the top. I feel like that's not necessarily cohesive. Do I want meeples? I'm not really sure how I feel about meeples. Especially if we have like miniatures for some of the things and we have meeples for others. I'm feeling very torn on that aspect. Do I just want thicker tiles? I don't know what I want for the workers. I'm not going to voice an opinion there because I just don't know what I want. I can see the benefit or the appeal of multiple options. I don't know which ones work for me. I definitely want marbleized dice for all the various player dice and the dice you have in the game. I want something upgraded, perhaps larger dice, not too large. Too large starts to feel chunky, but slightly larger than the ones you have over here, and some degree of marbleized texture or something to them. 3/6 is a solid roll, although for Castle of Burgundy, it's just as good as any other roll because 6s are not inherently better. But I definitely want upgraded dice, upgraded pieces as much as I possibly can, although when it comes to these goods over here, this is where you potentially have room to experiment and to play, but also to mess things up if you experiment and play too much. You see, you have these goods over here that are going in these stacks and coming out every single round to these zones over here. You could make those incredibly premium. You could make 3D deluxeified resources that you put into a bag and you pull them out. There's lots of options you could do with them, but all of them involve making these significantly larger, taking up a lot more space, slightly taking away from the accessibility of the game, doing so in a way that might make these very, very cool. I can see a lot of potential promise, but also a lot of potential frustration by making these into something more than just a tile. I could see it going either way. And that's why that's another area where I'm not really casting a vote so much as waiting and seeing and hoping that they make a good decision, because I don't know what the right decision is. I know what's safe. What's safe is sticking to what they have now and just making it a little bit more premium, similar to the texture, sizing, and adjustments you're making to the regular tiles. But I also want more, while recognizing that wanting more is not necessarily a good thing. Speaking of wanting more, that's not a good thing. We have the ship track, the turn order track, in which you're going to have your various pieces tracking where you are in the turn order. And this is one which is tricky, because I have a concept in my mind that I like, but a concept that I don't see a good solution to a problem. Okay, here's the concept I like. I want this to be like more of a ship track, where you have ship miniatures. Each player has their own ship miniature, and as you move along the track, your ship miniature and the positioning on the track shows who's first in turn order, and there's a problem with that. The problem is, right now in Castle Burgundy, if you go higher than someone else, you simply go on top of their piece. Stacking ship miniatures kind of loses the appeal that you had of them in the first place. Having 4 different tracks and then moving to the top positioning of the track could potentially be done, but also potentially looks very, very messy. And so I like the idea of ship miniatures tracking our positioning, since after all, when you get the goods and when you put your ship down, that's when you move up on the track. So I like the idea of that being represented by a ship, but also I recognize the slight problem of what happens when you're tied. How do you adjust for the tie positioning in turn order without it becoming a cool solution and it becoming overly clunky instead? So that's a concept and an idea, but not one with a firm picture at the end of it. Miniatures are going to be the most controversial thing here. Miniatures are going to be a huge problem in the sense that there's a lot of things that Awaken Realms can do with miniatures that can potentially improve the experience. And there's a lot of things they can do with miniatures that potentially make the experience significantly worse. At the end of the day, the Castle of Burgundy, all I really need from this is a nicer looking game. Meaning just in terms of the art. Everything else is gravy. Everything else is, sure, throw it into a deluxe super over the top edition. But all I really need is a slightly nicer looking game with better art. The rest of the stuff runs the chance of ruining it as much as it does helping and improving upon it. And miniatures can ruin it, or can significantly improve the experience. You see, I do think that having a board with your miniature on the board, your castle, and they've already shown us a render of a castle, maybe that's just your starting castle, but even just that already has the potential to obfuscate the numbers and to not be as easily visible to yourself or others. To look impressively cool, absolutely. If you've ever seen Foundations of Rome from Arcane Wonders, I mean, the game looks incredibly cool. But also, it's giving you that cool immersion at the cost of the clean accessibility. There are always trade-offs in life. If you ever look at Brass Birmingham from Roxley Games, or the original Age of Industry, way before, the original Brass even, the difference between a very pretty-looking game, but a very accessible game, is always a conversation about trade-offs. And it's always a conversation that's tricky, because I like the pretty, the shiny, I like the new art, the miniatures, the bling, I like all those things. But they do take away to some degree from the experience otherwise. And so, miniatures are a huge potential problem. Both with the ships, if they do a first-player marker with ships, both with the workers, if they add that, as well as with having anything from a starting castle to having every single tile represented by a miniature. For those who don't know how to play Castle of Burgundy, you can't easily do that on its own. I mean, you can't easily run the setup of the board because you have to be drawing these randomized tiles. So you have to have tiles that you pull from the bag, and you put them onto the various spots, and players draft them. Now, in theory, from there, it would not be the hardest thing to have players pulling their own sideboard, a tray of miniatures they can slide out, similar to what Foundations of Rome did. You could have your own customized tray of miniatures you pull out, and you're like, okay, great, I put down a castle, grab a castle, put it on. Oh, great, I put down a boat, boom, grab a boat, put it down. You could potentially do that. And it could result in something very, very solid, because you have games like Terraforming Mars Deluxe Edition, that this big box of Terraforming Mars is excellent. And it gives us just that. It gives us these trays full of miniatures that go onto the board and drastically improve the immersion of the Terraforming Mars experience. The difference between Terraforming Mars and Castle of Burgundy, and for context, by the way, when I got Terraforming Mars, I was worried that this would not make the game accessible. This would make the game harder to table, and if it did, I was prepared to get rid of it. To me, the most important thing is that a game gets played, that a game gets tabled. I am all for the bling, I am all for the shiny, I am all for the upgrades and deluxification, but not if it takes away from the game being tabled. And rest assured, if I get this deluxe version of Castle of Burgundy from Awaken Realms and I find that I do not play the game as much because of it, I will get rid of it and keep the current version of the game I have. The most important thing to me is that I play the game. But past that, the difference between Terraforming Mars and Castle of Burgundy is exactly that aspect of the randomized tiles coming out, that you have to have two systems at play. This is going to be similar to Castle Panic Deluxe Edition, where you can't purely just proxy in a miniature for a tile. You kind of have to say, we want the miniature, so we'll end up using both. We'll use the tile for the randomization, and then once the tile comes out, we'll proxy the miniature in place. You could do that, and it might make it the best game of Castle of Burgundy I've ever played. It also might make it so that I don't want to table Castle of Burgundy as much. There are possible things they can do that make all these ideas merge together, even just from a mechanical standpoint. If you have your double-layer player boards with the little ridges between each zone and the tiles that pop up so it's above the ridge, it wouldn't be the hardest thing, I say this from someone who has no knowledge of production whatsoever, but to create a miniature with a slight indentation so the miniature kind of rests on top of the ridge tile while resting on the tile itself, taking advantage of that increased divot to hold the miniature in place, locking over the specific tile. You start getting into interesting conversations. What about the sign tiles? How do you indicate? Sure, a boat's easy enough. If you really want to get detailed, you can start messing around with the various farm animals, but do you have tiles for every single farm animal of every single type, of every single count of... There's a lot of potential issues with the making every single thing a miniature solution. But it might be the coolest game of Castle of Burgundy to ever play, which is why I'm very, very torn on how miniaturific do we want this game to get. And I absolutely do want it to fit onto a single Calyx cubby. If this game expands outwards to 2 Calyx cubbies, we have a problem. Some of you, very reasonably, are a little frustrated that I'm like, a single Calyx cubby? It shouldn't be more than a single, it should be a tiny box. Why is this over-the-top production? I don't know. Awaken Realms has already made it clear that there will be options, there will be add-ons, there will be possibilities. They will be offering one version to some people and other versions to people who want more. And so the idea of an all-miniature version does seem to be crying out to those who potentially want more. And I am interested even as I am nervous. I like the idea of it. It could be amazing. It also could make Castle of Burgundy the 3rd time we've seen this game screwed up. Which is why it's very interesting. This is my favorite. That's not true. This is my second favorite. This is my favorite game. This is my second favorite game as of right now. And it's one that I'd love to have a cooler, more interesting deluxe experience. And I'd love to have it done in such a way that I can leave the cooler deluxeified miniatures off to the side and not play with them so that they don't get in my way and they don't hurt the experience. But that when I want that extra degree of immersion, that I have the option of building out the coolest Castle of Burgundy that I've ever built. We'll see what happens next. I'm just as much of a bystander as you right now. I just want to see... I want to see this game done right by, and I'm already afraid that my eyes are bigger than my stomach. We'll see what happens. Until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co., and I hope you have a good one.